Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure, and we're going to be on an adventure today talking about information overload with my guest who will be on in a few seconds. Before we start, though, I want to remind you all about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon at 1:30. In there, I do a brief overview of the current planetary alignments as they pertain to all of us on the planet, and then I break it out into each individual sign below that. I encourage you to always read your sun sign and your rising sign to get the most accurate reading for your week to come. And remember that astrology is a theme-based modality so that you're going to get broad strokes of where things are happening in your life. And this is accurate, without any question in my mind. It is totally accurate, but you want to be sure to understand that it is a theme-based modality and you're going to get broad-based ideas. It's up to you to drill down and see how that pertains into your own life, and I think you'll find it to be fascinating. So, without further ado, let's get my guest on. Years ago, I met this great guy named Ryan Gable, and he is the host of a great show called The Secret Teachings radio show, which is a fantastic show I've heard from many years ago. He's a researcher, a writer, and he named the show after the philosopher Manly P. Hall's great work, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, which is a fascinating book. Any of those of you who have listened to me in the past, you know I've also referred to that book as well. It's a fascinating discovery. But his particular show focuses on the synchronicity of alternative news, the health, including GMOs and organic health industries, alternative history, the paranormal, astrotheology, transhumanism, alchemy, artificial intelligence, science, the occult, magic, politics, symbolism, philosophy, the esoteric, and the secret doctrine, all of which fall under my umbrella of spiritual adventure. So I'm always happy to have him on, and it's great. We're going to be talking today about information overload. So welcome to the show, Ryan. It's great to have you back on.
Hey, thank you, Chris. It's been a while. I'm glad to be on your show, and I'm glad to have you on my show soon.
Yeah, it's great. We have a good synchronicity here going on. Anyway, we're going to be talking today about information overload, and I think that we are living in a time where we are certainly in the midst of that. If it's not enough for us to, we've got used to this very gradually by working our way up with computers and trying to spend all our time in there. And then all of a sudden now we've got cell phones in our hands within the last 10, 15 years, and people are just consumed by the information. And I'm wondering what the long-term ramifications of it and how it plays out over society. I mean, as psychologists look back at this time in our lives, what are they going to see, I wonder? What do you have? Any thoughts about that?
I have a lot of thoughts. Yeah, just like there's so many different subjects that kind of fall under your umbrella of research and knowledge. Same with me. And everything is very important. As you know, I think astrology kind of ties into that same concept. Mm-hmm. Everything is connected with one another. So when you start looking at things like technology, that's a really broad term for some people. And it's also a very simple term for other people, because with information overload, we tend to either define things more than they need to be defined, or we don't define them to the degree for which they need to be defined, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, totally, yeah. Either defined or underdefined.
That's right. So I always say that we take a very simple situation and we make it really complex, and we take complex situations that need to be understood in a complex way, and we make them too simple, and that causes problems throughout many fields of understanding and research, etc. So when it comes to technology, in terms of looking back on this time, I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing or maybe a neutral thing, but growing up, I'm 26 years old, so I grew up in a time where the technology in relation to phones and the internet was really coming about. And as I grew up, the internet was one of those things that I grew up with. It wasn't something that kind of developed as I was already old enough to be consciously aware of it. It was just something I grew up with. Mm-hmm. So that provided me, obviously, with access to large amounts of information. And as I went to school, middle school, high school, and even a little bit of technical school, I found myself in a situation where everything was already in the process of moving to being on the internet. Everything was moving to digital. And I always saw myself as kind of traditional in the sense that I like paper books and things like this. I like to actually hold it in my hand rather than having to log online to see it. And there's benefits and I think there's ramifications of this that are very negative. The first thing that's a benefit is that we have access to large amounts of information. And it doesn't make it as difficult to research something because we can go online. But there's a downside to that. And the downside is there's so much information that basically anybody can say whatever they want online, as you know, and that can be taken as a fact, even though it's
Yeah.
not a fact.
There's no way of discerning. There's no central arbiter. There's no central filter that says this is right, this is wrong. This is one of the problems that we are facing, I think, with the proliferation of what we've now known as fake news. And it's very frustrating because people are really trying to get their heads around the idea of how do we find out what the truth is. In the old days, like I'm much older than you, but when I was growing up, I had an Encyclopedia Britannica in my house, a book, a
Sure.
series of 26 books. And if I wanted to look something up for a school paper I had to write, I'd go there, look at it, I'd quote the Encyclopedia Britannica as the source, and that was considered to be, yes, that's accurate, that is the right person, that's the right place to go, it's an accurate, redeemable source. Now, as you mentioned, we don't have that luxury. And now things get very, very fuzzy. And that is one of the downsides of information overload. Granted, we can get information at any point in time from anybody, which is really helpful. But there is no governing factor, no governing source or entity that can parse what is right and what is wrong. That's one of the
And
biggest frustrations.
I don't think that there should be. My basic metaphysical philosophy is more of a Masonic philosophy, if we want to define it, where I believe that personal introspection and refining our centers of thought and emotion and action can build a better person, if you will. The allegory of building a temple, your body is a temple, and also society is a temple, an unfinished pyramid that must be completed with good works, if you will. And each person represents who is illuminated in a way, who is aware, who is conscious, who wants to provide and give back to the community, is an illuminated individual and a brick within the construction of that building. Just like every action that we take, every emotion, every thought, these are refinements that are personalized bricks, if you will, in the building and construction of our own temple, which is unfinished until essentially we die. But in that philosophy, there's an element of balance and objectivity where we can make a decision based upon balancing and weighing all sides of a situation. And I don't mean everybody's opinion. I just mean usually when there's an argument about anything from the environment to politics, it's very polarized where you either agree or you disagree. And very little, very often, not very often rather, do we have a situation where people can openly accept that there's more than two ways to look at something, whether you agree or disagree with it. So I think objectively, with that influx of information, it's great that we have it, and I don't really see it as more of a downside than when we didn't have as much access online and we had to go to the encyclopedia. But even when you had to go to the encyclopedia, some of those things I'm sure that are in the encyclopedia are not necessarily correct, and you have to discern whether something is accurate and whether something is perhaps false, whether that's intentional or it's just a mistype, a misprint or a typo or something like that. I think it's up to each one of us. We have to make the decision about what's accurate by discerning information through an objective lens, not looking at it through a preconceived notion of what should or shouldn't be there because of our belief or because of our faith. It has to be very objective, and we have to take, which was what objectivity is, take the emotion out of that analyzation of whatever the subject might actually be. And also with technology, the thing about it, I think that it concerns me more than whether or not something is accurate, is the fact that with computers it's nice because we can type a book or we can type a letter, and most computers will tell us in a word processing document when we get a word wrong. So it'll tell us if we misspelled it or if there's a grammatical issue. And that's fine, and that's great. But now we're to the point where we can ask our phones. We can ask these minor forms of artificial intelligence, like through Google, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Amazon, how do you spell this word? What's the answer to this math problem? And there's no process of learning. We don't even have the children especially aren't really given the opportunity, if their parents are buying them these types of devices, to have to go to a dictionary or to have to look a word up online or in an encyclopedia. So we're even moving past the part where we can look it up online. Now we're just relying to a large extent on artificial intelligence, asking Siri or asking Cortana or asking the Amazon Echo, Alexa, what's the answer to this? What's the temperature outside? Well, what's this multiplied by this? And we're not actually doing this ourselves. And I attributed this to something, Chris, recently. I've just kind of thought about this. the Egyptian civilization has always been kind of brought up in our modern day because of whatever reason. I mean, it's the theme at theme parks, it's in TV shows, Ancient Aliens, things like this. But if you look at the Great Pyramids, there's only three Great Pyramids essentially in that complex at Giza. The rest of the pyramids were built later, and they were dilapidated. They weren't built to the same specifications. They were lopsided. They weren't constructed in a way where all the stones and the material lined up, exactly. So they were built in an inferior way compared to the older pyramids. And that's key because the older pyramids were built with some type of knowledge that far preceded the more supposedly advanced civilization that came along. But it's reversed in Egypt because the advanced civilization came first, it seemed, and then the later civilizations became inferior.
Right.
And right. So what concerns me, Chris, this is my point, is that we're to an extent, to a degree now in our society where we have a microwave, we can warm up TV dinners, for example. This is the example I thought of. But in a couple of generations, let's say cooking as an art or as a necessity, which is slowly being kind of eradicated in our society with fast food and with processed meals that we can buy. What happens when people forget how to cook? What happens to civilization? That's a fundamental key element within all civilizations, within all societies. And I think we can apply that to basically all fields of study. What happens when we forget the basic elements that make us human in replacement for this artificial intelligence and technology?
Right. Now, I saw much of this growing up as a kid because there was a time in my lifetime when I would go to the store, I'd buy something, and they had an old-fashioned cash register, and the person had to figure out in their head how much change you were owed rather than being told by the register how much you were owed. There would actually be a transaction. Of course, cash is becoming a vanishing entity in itself. But the person who was behind the register, the cashier, had to know basic math and how to count back the amount of money that was given to them versus what they owed back to you. That was a manual, introductory kind of a mathematical computation that had to happen in their minds before they could give you the money back. That has totally disappeared. So your point about all of these things that are being taken away from us does make sense to me, and it does ring true to me, but I also want to view this through the eyes of what it means to be evolutionary and what it means to be contemporary. Because, at the time that the TV came out, I remember people saying, "Oh, that's it. The TV is going to ruin the world. It's going to take everybody away. They're not going to read books anymore, blah, blah, blah," and all those things. And to some extent, that was true. However, each step in progress brings us closer to a space and time where we become contemporary people. And so we have to use contemporary tools to live in contemporary times. Otherwise, we can't really navigate the waters properly. So if you're a person now with an old-fashioned flip phone and you're trying to get to someplace, you have no GPS in your phone or whatever, you can't do it. You've got to refer to an old analog map. Those are skills that I still like. I still use them because I'm much older than you. I still use maps. I still look for phone booths and whatever, even though I have a smartphone. But I'm saying they're vanishing things, and I understand that. My bigger concern is what it does to our brains and how it limits what we learn. And I think this is getting to your point as well. We don't use our brains as much as we much did, or if we do, how are we using them differently? I would hope that we would use them to make a better place for ourselves to live, a better planet, spend more time with our relatives and family and loved ones, and become more tribal in that regard and self-sufficient amongst our tribe, so to speak. But where do we go? Where do our skill sets go and expand if all of these things that were used to be considered skills are now disappearing?
Exactly, and that is one of the basic philosophies that I've examined and I think about quite often. I've talked about it in all of my books, and I have a new book coming out. I've talked about it, and I discuss it on my show all the time. I'll read you a quote, actually, from my favorite author, Manly Palmer Hall, for which you mentioned The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Mm-hmm. He says, "As man attempts to elevate himself spiritually, he gradually separates himself from his material environment." Now, Manly P. Hall also wrote the inverse of that, basically that when man attempts to elevate himself materially, he separates himself from spirituality. Mm-hmm. So it's not that technology is bad. Technology, just like information, we have an overload of technology, sure, but we have to objectively find a way to use it where we don't base it upon emotions or what becomes more convenient, because I think it's the lack of effort that people want to put in that results in the overuse of technology to the extent where we are not learning to have basic math skills, where we're not learning to have basic fundamental just skills in general, whether that's cooking or reading a map. So when I look at technology, technology can help us if, let's say, you're in a car wreck and you have a spinal cord injury. You put a microchip in the brain, great, and you might be able to move your arms again, and that's really beneficial. But that's different than giving a 5-year-old a smartphone and a tablet when you don't want to be a parent. That's
Hmm.
different than giving your child an artificially intelligent device because you just don't want to deal with your child today. So there has to be, just like the overload of information, where we as individuals have to objectively decide and discern what is accurate and do more research. It's the same thing with technology. Technology is not bad and technology is not good. Technology, like information, is neutral. It's what we do with it that will decide what happens to our spiritual, emotional, physical, etc. development, I think, Chris.
Right. So the thing is that when I was growing up, we would always think of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you've got food, clothing, and shelter at the bottom of the pyramid, and then you work your way up as those things become, not required. So we are at this point in time, as you mentioned earlier about food, and we basically have all the major things covered in most of. And generally speaking, this is a very broad statement, but the things of food, clothing, and shelter are sort of taken care of. So you would think that with more time on our hands, which presumably we have, although it doesn't seem that way, with more time on our hands because of all these time-saving devices that we have, we should be able to devote more time to evolving spiritually and involving our intellect in a new and different way. And yet, we probably are at the crossroads where that may be happening, but it's not quite clear how that's all going to settle down.
No, it's not. And that's where I think we allow things to unfold in terms of, and I don't mean Darwinian, but just in terms of evolution as technology, as society, as our understandings kind of unfold and continue to develop. That's something to, of course, be seen. What I think concerns me the most, going back to that example of the pyramids and even the microwave and learning how to cook, or just learning how to basically do math, as you said with the cash register, what concerns me is the general lack, whether it's in schools or it's in just people's jobs, just average everyday jobs, people's lack of willingness to go a step further because they want to actually achieve something. It seems like our society, especially in a westernized sense, has been so cultivated in a way where we want to do the least amount of work, and
Hmm.
the more we work, the more we want to relax, the more we want those pleasures that we think we want in life. I mean, a good example of this. So I'm 26 years old. I grew up playing video games, watching sports, and not caring about anything else. Now, if you watch sports, I don't care. It's not a bad thing. I like to watch hockey. If you play video games, I play video games once in a while. It's not a bad thing. Again, moderation and objectivity, balance between two extremes. But what I see is that when I'll talk to people that are somewhat my age or roughly my age, and I'll say, well, what do you really want to do in life? And I didn't know at one point, and most people still don't know what they want to do in life. It's just what you think you have to do to pay
Hmm.
bills, etc. So the answer I usually get from people I know, friends, etc., is that, well, I want to watch TV. I want to relax. I don't want to have to work. But for me, Chris, I feel like within past generations, let's say you were, and this is an art that's probably become entirely extinct, but let's say you were a shoemaker and you made a pair of shoes, and they were horrible shoes. That was who you were. So you wanted to do everything you could to make the best pair of shoes. Maybe you had an apprentice as well. You taught that apprentice, but you wanted to do everything you could to make the best pair of shoes because that was your livelihood. That's how people saw you. You were a shoemaker. People don't do that anymore because we've modernized, if you will, everything, and we've made everything very technical and mechanical. So machines do a lot of the work for us. And again, balance, objectivity, and perspective is what we need to have in order to understand and responsibly use this type of technology, because it's great. Sure, it's great that we have machines to do certain things for us, but the more we have with machines, the more we're going to see that certain people with the money and the power to operate those machines in big corporations and businesses are going to promise the average person, you don't have to work as much, so you can just sit back, watch TV, play games. But you don't have money to do that because now you don't have a job. Machines have taken those jobs over. There has to be a way to be able to implement that technological advancement because it's neutral, but also to be able to recognize that what most people truly want to do, and I've seen this through my own transformation over the years, Chris, is that what I thought I wanted to do, I didn't really want to do. That's just what I was kind of programmed to think I wanted to do. What I
Hmm.
really want to do, I want to grow as an individual. I want to read. I want to learn things. And I think most people really want that, but they've been so conditioned and beaten down in so many different ways that all they want to do is just relax and ignore everything else that otherwise they would have to take responsibility for. That's just my view.
Well, not only that, but there has to be a motive. At some point in time, people have to be motivated. I would argue that if you're a demotivated person, all you want to do is sit on the sofa and watch TV, and then you've got endless streaming coming into your house. You don't even have to leave the house to go to the video store anymore. You don't have to leave the house to do much anymore if you don't want to. That is a very isolating kind of lifestyle, and it also is limiting in this fact that it doesn't motivate you to do anything else. It doesn't motivate you to take on new challenges, as you say, to read. How many people do people still read the way they used to do? I'm not sure that they do. They're much more prone to be watching a mini series on TV or on their phone, for that matter, even. And as a result, there is this insulated isolation, this kind of quality that people are getting. They're sort of getting wrapped in their own little world, and it's a digital world. It's a digital world that just limits what you can do. It isn't expansive. Now, I do have some hope. There are pockets of people out there who are returning to become artisans, who are doing handmade jewelry, and there are people who are doing handmade shoes and handmade clothes and craft beers and all kinds of stuff like that that are sort of a return to this natural inclination. Because I do think it's important for us to have this tactile ability to create with our hands rather than just sitting down and waiting for things to happen through a keyboard. I think that's very important that that happens.
Sure, and I think that's a really great point. I want to touch on that, but I want to go back just for a moment to what you said at the beginning of the show relating to what we call fake news. And I think people should understand that fake news comes both from internet trolls, if you will, and fake news also comes from mainstream media. So when you have anybody that's trying to focus and tell you this is what's considered reality, then you apply that to companies like Google who work with Facebook to determine what is considered accurate and true based upon really people's emotions, where Mark Zuckerberg said if you don't like something, you can report it as fake news. Then you have that same programming put into the artificially intelligent devices like Alexa that then tell you what is historical fact. They tell your children this, we grow up on this falsified information. So again, objectivity is very key. Now, when you apply that to social media like a Facebook, a Twitter, and all the other platforms, you call it social, but it's not really social. You think, well, you can connect with friends and family, loved ones. Maybe you want to find somebody you dated in high school. I don't know, and you can connect with those people, and that's really a great thing. That's a great benefit. But there's a problem with this because again, we're not using it in moderation. We use it so much that it becomes a way like a video game or like a movie. I think a lot of people, I never was one of these people, but a lot of people like to go see a scary movie because it's in a controlled environment and you can kind of experience your fears without having any danger. And I think social media and online dating as well kind of takes the place of that for social situations where you don't have to worry about being rejected by a woman or a guy out in public. You can just go online, and if somebody doesn't like you, if it's a dating or if it's a friend, or whoever it is, you can just block them. You can
Hmm.
send them a message. You don't have to. You don't even have to get up and get dressed and make yourself look nice or smell good. You can just get online. You don't like somebody, delete them. You like that, you can like that post. You can share that post. So it's much easier to experience these social situations that otherwise, if we were out in public and there's a situation that presents itself, maybe we handle it well, maybe we don't. But it's a learning experience. All things are learning experiences, I think, as we learn and we grow. But we don't have to do that anymore because on social media we can just sit down and again, if we don't like somebody, well, we can just block them. If we like somebody, well, we can literally like it, or we can share it, or we can send them a message. And at one point where they say something we don't disagree, agree with, and we disagree with, we don't have to debate it. Not that a debate's a bad thing. We can just again block them and not deal with it.
But
So
that
that
puts a
becomes an
major
issue.
it puts a major wedge between the people, and it doesn't allow us to really live in or step into our own humanity. If you just you can do it so quickly like that. It's very casual. It can be very
Hmm.
callous. It brings out some of the worst in people because they know that they can go online and pose as somebody else and trash whatever they want to trash and without any repercussions. It's not as if you get into a fight in high school and you get mad at somebody and you're physically there having this confrontation. You're in a removed environment where everything becomes an illusion. And this is part of the under thing that I think is important to recognize is that we are easily drawn into this because it is very compelling. Even people who I thought would not be drawn into this or would sort of shun this as a departure from the norm are being pulled in. Even people who are traditional learners, who are traditional hand workers, artisans, who are traditionally love books and love the whole process of learning, are drawn into this because it is very compelling. It's that constant feed. It's a curiosity rush. It's an instant hit, so to speak, and that's kind of scary. I agree.
Yeah, and that actually is a really good point because there's a couple of different conditions, I guess, medically that are defined in terms of technology where people are literally addicted. And I think I've even experienced this. I don't really have much by way of technology except my computer and my mixing board for my radio show, but I have an old phone. It's like one of the first generation smartphones, and I'll sometimes kind of feel that rush where you get a text message or you get a phone call, and that's the same kind of rush people get on social media because you get that instant gratification of, oh, they liked my post, oh, they posted a smiley face, they posted a comment, and that's different than interacting with people in society or interacting with people that you know in public. And so again, you don't have, like you said, that element of I guess it's an instant gratification. It's more the one word I always use is convenience. And there's a lot of things that are being sold to us for convenience that are not really about convenience. It's about selling a product, or it's about like in terms of people fighting for a higher minimum wage in California. That was something like, yeah, I agree with. I agree you should be making more money, but if the financial elements are not there within a business to provide you with more money for the service that you're providing to that business working there, then protesting for $15 an hour is not going to really do anything except force those companies, which they did, force those companies to bring in self-serving kiosks and robots, and now you don't have a job at all. So there's a really shaky balance there between what is right and what is wrong and what is neutral, I think, Chris.
Yeah, and if we look back historically, I think that there are some precedents that have been set here, and we are experiencing at different time. Like when the technology age first started, or even to go back to the Industrial Revolution, there were many people who doubted what was going to happen, and there were very strong arguments about the idea of what automation would do. What would Henry Ford create these cars, you know. And there was a great, from the time when the from the Industrial Revolution started, what we're experiencing now is a very similar kind of revolution. And we came out of that age okay, and we did progress rather, and we did make some great strides forward. And we are at a certain spot in time. Will this shift to the information age? When we look back at it 10, 50, 100 years from now, how will it look as far as where we are? Or will we become the automatons who live who eat a pill in the morning for our sustenance, and we are hooked up to machines, and we become sort of, empty-minded robots of sorts?
That's another really great point, Chris. And I think that when you acknowledge that that's even a possibility, and furthermore, it's not just a possibility, that is actually the agenda. I don't mean that in a nefarious way. That's actually the agenda of companies like Google or Alphabet and companies like Amazon, but Google in particular, where they literally, their chief engineer, Ray Kurzweil, wants to have every single human being hooked up to a hive mind by 2030. That makes a collective decision. Now, again, that's an idea that almost makes sense because bees and insects act in a hive mind. It's for the betterment of the hive. And we think, well, that's not a horrible idea. But then again, we have to acknowledge, just like the information, where's that information coming from? Who's making that final decision? Who's telling us what is considered to be real or fake? And although this is not entirely resting on the shoulders of government or corporations, there absolutely is an element within corporations, and I think it's both within corporations and within corporations and government that work together as well, that want to tighten the reins on the general populace. And I think there's an element of that within companies like Google, and again within the federal government agencies like the National Security Agency, CIA, etc., that use the technology for less than malevolent purposes. Benevolent purposes, rather, more malevolent purposes. So you have the smart technology, you have TVs, you have phones, the spying devices, essentially is what they are with the cameras and the microphones, and all sold to people based on convenience. But by the way, as Samsung tells us with their TVs, if you go to their website, don't say anything that you wouldn't say out in public in front of your television in your home because it's being recorded and sent to local law enforcement. It actually says that on their website. So these companies are able
Wow.
to claim and present themselves, and I'm sure there's many people that work in Google that truly think this and don't have a negative view, if you will, from my perspective, and they really want to help, and they pose as altruists, and they want to provide some type of technology for a better mankind. But the problem is there's also people working within those companies that want to sell your information to make money. There's people that want to have access to every private element of your life for whatever reason that is. And there's different reasons, there's different levels to this. I think, and this is my personal view, is that I completely agree that when we work together as a whole, collectively making decisions for the betterment of all, there are some difficult questions that may come up, but that is a very selfless, almost a very utopian type of society. And that's what's being presented to us by these technology companies, that this technology can give us that type of society. The problem is going through and developing these centers of refinement, as I mentioned earlier, for a better temple, a better pyramid, a better, in Masonic philosophy, a better utopian type society. Those are people individually making decisions, acknowledging that they are for the betterment of the whole. When we're being sold technology by these companies under the guise of this is better for everybody, it doesn't really become better for everybody. It's really better for the few individuals that sell it and have control of it. And for the average person, they think, well, this is better for everybody. And it's really a big trick, I think, Chris. And that's at least what I've seen.
I can definitely see that. We're talking today with Ryan Gable. He is the host and the guiding light behind the Secret Teachings radio show. His website is thesecretteachings.info. We're going to take a short break here. We'll be back to continue our discussion. We're talking about information overload and how it impacts us, because we're at a time and place in our lives, in the development of humanity, where information is becoming more and more a part of our lives. This is not a new topic by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have some insight, and it is disturbing time to be living in, especially when we see what's happening at the higher level of our government. So we'll be back in about 2.5 minutes, and just hang in there. We'll be right back.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today. Or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My guest today is Ryan Gable. He is the host and the brainchild behind a website called thesecretteachings.info. He is a radio host, author of many books, and we're talking today about information overload, which is a very interesting topic, especially when we see the concepts of such things as fake news, the idea of misinformation, and of course the addiction to information and how much that drives people. And I think that one of the things that always startled me and bothered me about sort of the Facebook and the social media conundrum is the fact that it sets in place sort of this constant comparison of trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, that old phrase from when I was growing up. If the next door neighbor got a new car, you got to get a new car. Well, in social media, if someone's on a beautiful island on vacation, they're sending you pictures, all of a sudden now you think, gosh, why am I not on that beautiful island with those beautiful pictures? And it sort of sets in place this sense of lack. There's a lack. We always feel as if we're not doing enough, accomplishing enough, having enough fun. And it's not a real true barometer for what reality is. Life is actually pretty damn difficult, and I would argue that I think it should be, because I think in the difficulty comes the triumph, and it's through hardship that we overcome these barriers, and we live and we evolve and grow through hardship. If everything is handed out and it's wonderful all the time, then we become very apathetic and sort of laconic and just blobs. So I think that that's important that we keep our eyes on that idea, because that is a large part of it. I've heard people, it was an article I read in the New York Times probably 3 or 4 months ago called "Fear of Missing Out." That's a new term, FOMO, FOMO. And if you have a bunch of friends and they're all at the bar and they're posting photos of themselves and you're not there, you are going to feel hurt. That's the downside, and that concerns me in some respects.
Well, that's also something we mentioned in the last segment, is that in relationship to what other people are doing or what we consider to be pleasurable or fun and exciting is what we think we really want to do all the time, because we really don't want to work. We really don't want to have to go in and work for somebody specifically. A lot of us don't. And there's an element of that that is very inversed from generations in the past, where you took pride in your work. Maybe it was stressful, maybe it was overwhelming sometimes, but you took pride in what you did. If you were insert whatever name, that was who you were, and you took pride in that work. And when you had an opportunity to relax or sit down or take a nap, there was an element of that. And I find it today, for me, writing books or doing a radio show, sometimes I'll think, even working for myself, it's really difficult to get myself up in the morning, get everything prepared, do the show. But I've always got that push, like you want to do this. This is why you are doing this, Ryan, because you love it and because it helps people and it informs people. So get up and do it. And so I hear that voice, if you will. I get up, I do it, and I feel accomplished. And I think that so many of us don't feel that accomplishment, so we think that work is a bad thing and we just want to ignore it and relax. Accomplishment is an amazing, beautiful, wonderful thing. That is what success is, whether it's writing a poem, writing a book, or you get up and you clean your apartment or you clean your house, accomplishing something, even if it's a small little goal. That is so fundamental and so necessary, I think, for our emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental health. What do you think about that in terms of success or accomplishment, Chris?
Oh, I'm very much of a person like that. I wake up every morning and I have a list of 5 to 15 things I want to get done in the day, regardless of what they may be. It may be something simple, but oftentimes they're big things. I want to write a chapter. I want to read this book. I want to get, whatever the list may be. I am a person who's very goal-oriented, and I find great satisfaction in accomplishing those goals. I love seeing the list at the end of the day with everything crossed off of it. And days when I don't have that, I often feel sometimes empty and unfulfilled. So I think that there's a real humanistic element there. And I think your comment about people going to work, they don't feel fulfilled in their work. No one really wants to be, I don't think they get a charge out of sitting in a cubicle for some big company hammering away at a keyboard for 8 hours and worrying about where their children are or is their baby safe at daycare. These are all things that are not fulfilling in that regard. So I think and then what they do is they get home, because they put in so many hours, they're tired when they get home. All they want to do, again, as you say, is relax or go on Facebook or surf the web or whatever and get out of that framework. And it becomes a major distraction. And the distraction, I think, as you alluded to earlier, is being manipulated against us. Now, I don't always know, and this is an interesting comment for us to talk about. I'm not sure as if there's a bunch of CEOs sitting around a table saying, how can we manipulate society? I think these things happen sort of organically without premeditation. That's probably, the idea of a conspiracy that people are sitting around a table like a cabal looking to sort of, let's find a way to harness society so it goes this way or goes that way. I'm not quite so sure it's that simple. I think it is more organic in as much as people come up with ideas and they happen to work with other ideas. Like Facebook comes out and their idea works, and then all of a sudden the iPhone works with Facebook, and those two things. I don't think they sat down and said, premeditatively said, let's put these things together. I think they evolved together as a result of just, one guy has a good idea, another guy's a good idea, they put them together, they got a third idea. I think that's more how it happens. And what do you think?
I agree and only disagree maybe in the terminology, because I'll take the word that you used, and you said simple or simplified, and I think that is really key, because we do take a really complex situation and we simplify it. And the simplification, and I've done a show on this recently, is the people that believe it's 99% versus 1%, or it is a shadowy cabal versus the rest of the population. And that's just not, from my research, that's just not even logical or reasonable. There's not one group of individuals, I don't think, controlling every aspect of everybody's life. It's not like that. There is more. I almost disagree in terms of organic, but I guess that is an okay word to use. There is a more organic element to this. Now, I don't not think that there aren't a shadowy group of individuals, men and women, that do make these types of decisions, sure, but they're not necessarily making those decisions for some part of a global conspiracy. They're making those decisions, if you want to call it a conspiracy, for the betterment of themselves or the betterment of their own families or the betterment of the company that they work for. I have no doubt that there's people probably at Amazon or Google that sit around and do make these types of decisions, but it's not for some shadowy cabal that includes every corporation and government in the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I don't think that I don't think there's necessarily a master plan behind all this. To me, that's just a bit of a stretch. That's all.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I don't think that there's a master plan behind it either. If you were to ask me, do I think people sit around a kind of a table like the X-Files and make those decisions? Sure, on some level, but to the degree that we actually think it or we imagine it because we saw it in a movie or a TV show, it's not like that at all. Mm-hmm. And I think that the element of simplification and polarizing things, where it's that idea of it's us, all of us versus them. Well, who exactly are them? Who is they? Well, there's got to be another way we can analyze whether it's a benevolent or malevolent agenda and understand where it's coming from and why it's being unraveled in the way that it is. Because I think you're exactly right in relationship to organic growth, where you have, let's say, Apple develops the iPad. And I don't think Apple's in some type of conspiracy with Microsoft and other companies to start developing tablets. Those companies just say, oh, look, iPad's doing really well. Apple seems to be leading the pack. Let's develop these cheap knockoff tablets and start making a bunch of money off of it. And money is and almost always is the guiding light for every one of these situations, whether it's government or corporations. The people are interested in making money and maintaining or attaining more power, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with every single CEO getting together and deciding, okay, let's all make Apple type iPads and then let's have them spy on people. No, that's just an element that's incorporated later. In fact, Chris, I'll give you a really good example of why I agree with what you said, but just maybe I don't define it the same way. When Edward Snowden released those documents from the National Security Agency, of course, it was downplayed and, he's just an analyst. Well, he was a lot more than that. He was very, very top in the National Security Agency, even within the Pentagon. And so he releases this information, and it came out that companies like Yahoo, Microsoft, Skype, Apple, etc., had handed over personal customer data to the federal government. And they acted like, we didn't know. And you know what? I don't think all the companies did know. And some of the companies were forced, like Yahoo. The CEO of Yahoo said that she was told by the NSA if she did not relinquish customer data, they'd put her in federal prison. So that wasn't her involved in a conspiracy. That was her threatened that if she didn't give up customer data through the company, she'd be put in prison. Mm-hmm. So you also, within that, then you have to break it down to different layers. There's also elements in that where these companies, having nothing to do with the conspiracy, they just want to make more money. So they try to get your phone number, they try to get an extra email address, and then they catalog all that, and then they sell it for profit, even though they say they don't sell it for profit. So if anything, that's the only conspiracy. It's just a conspiracy to make more money while telling customers that everything that they do and buy is all for privacy and safety and protection, when it's really kind of the opposite, and they sell your privacy, if you will. So that's just how I view it. So I'm with you completely on that, I think.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, when you look back, I mean, historically, there's always been an ebb and flow to progress, and we do see the rises and falls of empires, and we've seen that historically through the course of our times. And we would say that I argue that history completely repeats itself over and over again. It's like a giant time, to me, is like a Helios, like a corkscrew, where yes, things do recur, events do recur, progress recurs, but you're always in a different time and place when it happens. The theme remains the same. It comes around in a cyclical nature. I would argue, based on astrology, that there's a cyclical nature to all that we are doing, and that you can trace it back to the time of the ancient Greeks and beyond. And then there comes a time when that same sort of cycle repeats itself, but it's just down the road further. So that would give us a reason to think that there will be an upcoming shift at some point in time when we will change, or there will be a fall of some sort of change. If because we are all dependent upon the digital world, and that's all tied to magnets, and it's all tied to hard drives or whatever, or any kind of digital media, hard, fast hardware media. If that were to be compromised in some way, where would that leave us? Could we go out and chop wood? Could we grow vegetables? Could we cook, 10, 15, 20 years from now, if all those are gone, as you mentioned? What would we look like? Would we revert to our natural instincts to find the right way for that?
Yeah, and I think that's really the basic, fundamental, and profound philosophical question: is how much effort and attention and how much focus do we put on knowing how to do very simple, necessary human jobs, if you will, like cooking or maybe chopping wood, building yourself a fire, and finding shelter, as opposed to putting all of our attention and the little bit of effort that we do apply into relying on technology in any shape, form, any capacity to do those things for us. So again, there's a difference between looking online and believing everything you read and ignoring the internet and saying, okay, nothing good can come from the internet. And there's a difference between saying, okay, technology is horrible, there's going to be robots, they're going to kill everybody, it's going to be like Skynet and we're all going to die, and acknowledging that, yeah, technology can be good. You might be able to use it for someone who has a spinal cord injury, or, yeah, you could use it for the elderly, there's different applications for that. Or there's elements that you can use technology in schools. That's really good. That's a benefit. But then there's also an element of that where if you go so far, if you swing that pendulum so far to one side, then it becomes unbalanced again. And that's all I'm trying to say, is there has to be some type of balance in our objectivity and approach and perspective to acknowledging anything, whether that's technology or information, or even, I think, astrology. Your subject would be another great example, because in typical society, there's people that argue about the subject of astrology, where astrology is either complete hogwash or it's the end-all be-all. And there's an element, I think, of, I don't know if you'd agree with me, of balance where, yeah, astrology, I think astrology is very real. I think it's common sense, but I would never say that astrology is the only thing that matters and nothing else matters, or that astrology is hogwash. Astrology is very, very legitimate, I believe, and it's very much a common sense, or you should take a common sense approach when viewing it. I think it makes sense. But it's a matter of balance in the middle.
I would agree.
And then
it
makes sense.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I've always been one that, as maybe I'm a little bit on the fringe when it comes to astrology in that regard, but I do believe it is very valuable in some respects, but it does require a balanced view. I think balance is important. So in that light, we would, I'm concerned somehow by a younger generation that does not know basic tools and simple survival skills. I wonder if, like I was watching somebody, my neighbor, the other day, and he was outside with an axe, and he's a young guy, and he does not know how to, he's trying to split a log with an axe that a fireman might use. Now, anybody who's ever split wood knows you don't use a thin-headed axe to split wood. You need a wide head, you need a splitting maul to split a piece of wood, because you have to have the wedge going through the log in order to split it. He did not know. He's out there hacking away with his axe, trying to split this log, and I walked over to him. I said, listen, all you need is a splitting wedge and a sledgehammer. I had one. I showed him how to do it, and he now knows that new skill. But that's coming from an older man like myself who knew that skill because I learned it when I was a kid. I did have hard, fast, tangible things. I saw my son the other day trying to fix his headlight in his car with duct tape. I'm like, man, you can't fix this headlight with duct tape. You need screws and stuff like that. That's what's missing. That's what's concerning me. So when you talk about balance, I agree. Our industrial arts taught in schools is home economics taught in schools, cooking classes in schools, all these basic things, or are we all relying on getting our food in the mail via FedEx to our doors, where we just throw it into a pot and it's ready to roll, and we throw it in the microwave, it's ready to roll? That's where I agree with you that this balance is vital. I think the balance is vital for our sense of self, our mental clarity, our mental stability. I think if we get too lost in the digital realm, we will lose our sense of humanity, ultimately.
Sure, and I think that the really good example of that could be applied to food again, where, after World War II, you had a lot of these companies with all this prepackaged food that was given to soldiers,
right,
with a bunch of food left over, and they thought, well, what can we do? Oh, well, we'll sell it to families. And they kind of came out with this I call it propaganda because it's very misleading in terms of information, and they would start, presenting this to moms and to dads, people that would cook, and say, you know what, you want to spend more time with your family, right?
Right.
Who can argue with that? Of course you do. So here, pop this in the oven, and later pop this in the microwave. It'll make things a lot simpler. And food became, well, it didn't really stay food. It became less than food. It became processed. It became plastics and preservatives, and people become ill from that. And degenerative diseases are spreading: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, etc. And we act as if we don't really know what the source of this is. And there's a lot of different reasons. It's not just food, but diet is one of the main ones. And we're not acknowledging that because it's as if food has no longer is no longer defined as food. Like, I just read an article the other day in a local newspaper. I think it was taken from maybe the Associated Press feed, where the average person, I guess, that was surveyed or talked to thought that home cooking was buying a box of like Stouffer's at the store and cooking. And that's not home cooking. Home cooking, you buy the tomatoes, you buy the vegetables. Even if you're eating meat, you buy the meat. You fry it up, you steam it, you bake it, whatever you're going to do. That's home cooking. That's a lot different than putting something in the microwave. But yeah, you're right. That skill is being almost eliminated, and I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's a byproduct of overusing these types of technologies or advancements, where we're not looking at it from a balanced point of view, because life just is a lot easier. Again, going back to that element of work, we just want to go to work, come home. It makes things easier. It's just convenient, but we're not looking at those elements of, hey, if you cook a home meal, there's supposed to be an element in that meal, chopping up the vegetables, the garlic, whatever it is, that's peaceful. And you hear people say, they put love into their food, grandma or something. Yeah, that's actually true. And I'll tell you what, Chris, the food that I make for myself, I cook every single day, tastes, after I've changed my palate, tastes, I don't even want to use a percentage, but so much better than anything I ever ate at the store processed or anything I ever ate at a restaurant, because I'm doing it myself. I'm putting energy into it. And whether it's yourself or your family, you can actually taste and feel that. Everything is energy. So you can actually taste and feel that. And that's something that's sadly being eliminated and even vehemently opposed by the food companies that want to, of course, make money off of processed foods.
Yeah, it always cracks me up when I go to the supermarket and I see it says homemade on it. It's just like such a misnomer. But I mean, these are all valid points, and these are the sort of things I think that we need to focus on. And I think we're okay right now, but I mean, I worry more like, what's it like 50 years? What's it like for my grandchildren? What's it like when they get to that stage? Is there a great collapse that forces us all back to the earth? Is there this sort of diabolical shift that unplugs our phones and electricity and all our data is gone? Do we have some sort of a crash? I don't want to sound like an alarmist or a doomsayer, but what would happen if that was the case? Who would survive? Who would be able to? Who has the basic, natural skills to be able to survive something like that if that were to occur? Would that depend upon, could somebody who's a teenager now pull that off, I wonder?
I think it's probably a possibility, depending on where they live and the environment, et cetera, what they have access to. I don't think that's something we can answer, and I think you'd probably agree with like a definitive response. But I think the idea of, let's say, look at the Egyptian pyramids at Giza again.
Yeah, it's a good example.
A lot of scientists, archaeologists, et cetera, take a look and say, oh, well, the Egyptian civilization started out really advanced and then they declined. Okay, but then they deny that there was any type of civilization perhaps before that built up to that advancement and then disappeared for the same reasons that you're mentioning. And then later, when that teenager in Egypt, let's say, becomes kind of aware and civilization starts to build back up from a cataclysm, whatever the case might be, we take a look at these great structures. We take a look at maybe whatever's the remnants of our modern civilization. And we look at that and say, that's kind of cool. That there's a necessity for that, maybe. Whatever the case is, let's try to rebuild that. Let's try to reconstruct that. But we don't have the same kind of knowledge. We don't have the same kind of skill or know-how, and we have to develop that again. And I think that's why we look back on civilizations like Egypt or Greece or in Mesoamerica, and we think, well, how did they have that information? Did aliens give it to them? Was it an ancient civilization like Atlantis? Well, maybe. I don't know. But I think it's more logical to assume that they built up to an advancement. Something happened. Maybe it was a natural cataclysm or otherwise. And all of that technology, be it digital or again, otherwise, it could be any type of technology, it disappeared. We lost it. It was wiped out. And now whatever is remaining, like if, for example, I'll give another example real quick. If, let's say the West and the East or some countries, I don't know, I don't want to say Russia and the U.S., but let's say some countries launched a mild nuclear war. Okay, that's been threatened and people are scared of since the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, really. And people are terrified of that. Let's say the whole world's really wiped out. And there's a tribe of people that live on some island somewhere, and they're not in the middle of any of this. And they develop their technology. They got boats, and they decide to take a long trip, and they find mainland United States. And all they find is the remnants, 100, 1,000 years later, of the civilization that we had. And they don't know what phones are. They don't know what big concrete, glass, steel buildings are. But now they look at that, and they advance and perhaps take a little bit of the technology that we had, if you will, or architecture, etc. And they advance to what we are today, and look back and think, that it was a great ancient civilization. And and to a degree we were, but we got so advanced that we didn't develop the spiritual elements and components that were necessary, the respect, the responsibility, the virtues, the morals, the ethics that were necessary to balance out the overusage of that technology that led to, well, in an alarmist sense, that led to that demise. So I don't know if all that makes sense. I'm just trying to give example after example.
No, it does make sense. I mean, there was stuff, and you look back at. I mean, I always am amazed. Anytime you look at an ancient cathedral or even anything, even in the United States, furniture or houses or anything that was built 100, 200 years ago, we see the amount of detail and craftsmanship that went into those things. The finely carved columns and beautifully, the windows and the wainscoting that goes around the buildings, and the stuff that is. You go into any old state building, you're going to see this stuff, or even any old university, and yet we look at modern houses now. They're made out of plastic. I mean, they may be more energy efficient, but they certainly don't have the aesthetic appeal because the emphasis is not placed on that sense of pride and that sense of accomplishment and workmanship that you mentioned earlier. That real sense of the same satisfaction you get when you make yourself your own home food. That is sorely missing, and I wonder how that all disappeared. And is it because it disappeared because of the pace of progress, or did it disappear because we didn't need it any longer? I mean, why are things so much nicer back then? Why is it nice to see antiques and how well they were made? And people made their own clothes. It took for hours, days to make that stuff.
I don't know. I would say, because I've thought about this too, and I wrote about it in my new book. It's called The Technological Elixir. And I was thinking that perhaps one of the main reasons is we have, and I kind of analyzed this, is we've put a price tag on everything. We've made everything about economics and finance, this very fragile and very finite, rigid system of having to put a label on everything, and well, that cost $1, that cost $2, that cost this, that cost this, that cost that. And whether it was an old manor or a state building, you put detail, you put time, you put effort, you put attention into it, and it had that aesthetic appeal, like you mentioned. It was a lot of these houses are still in existence today, as opposed to things today that we can drag a trailer onto a lot and it'll be rusted and falling apart in 10 years because I think we just put a price tag on everything, Chris. I don't know. I think we make everything about money and economics, this very finite system, and we've taken the element of respect, of responsibility, of personal, spiritual, emotional, moral, ethical, etc. Development out of the equation, and now we focus everything again on making money, going to work, and so I can just go home and relax. I don't care about anything else, and go back to work, and so I can relax again. But if you're only working so you can relax, then you're not really living, as far as I'm concerned.
Right, and I guess money becomes the barometer of sorts. It becomes the measure of which we gauge. But even money is going to be. I mean, that may very well become extinct. I mean, it's going to be there in some form, but money as we once knew it perhaps will be becoming extinct. It's not clear yet how that goes. We're basically having a conversation here about. We're sort of having we're posing a lot of rhetorical questions. I don't think neither Ryan nor I has an answer. It's just an interesting discussion about how technology is impacting our lives and what it would do for us over the long term. It's an interesting subject. It does bear noting. I think it's important for us to be cognizant of the downfall and what it can be. I'm not trying to be a Luddite by any stretch of the imagination, somebody who's against technology. I'm very much of a future-oriented person. I like the idea of all the tools that we have at our disposal, but it does give pause to that basic human desire to create. I mean, I remember watching people edit film by hand, where they're cutting and slicing with razor.
Oh, yeah, like physically cutting it, yeah.
Physically cutting with razor blades, or when architects had to draw with pencils and paper, and photographers had to, adjust the chemicals in their baths when they were developing their photos. All that is lost now, and those are skills that, in some ways, are very tactile, tangible skills that are I miss them. I don't want to sound nostalgic, but I do sort of miss that quality.
Well, I went to film school actually when I got out of high school, and we did learn a little bit about chemicals, but they were actually just shifting to digital technology. And again, it's beneficial. It makes things easier. It allows everybody to do it. But then when everybody starts doing it, then it takes also the element of professionality out of it. So anybody can just grab a camera, take a picture. That's fine. That's okay. But then I think it really makes it difficult to determine what is. If we're going to have a guideline on what is proper and what is accurate and how things should be done, it takes that element out of it. So now,
it neutralizes everything and neutralizes the whole playing field. And there is no. I read a story recently where the cover of a famous magazine was taken on an iPhone. No longer was a professional photographer involved. Somebody happened to be at the right place at the right time, hit the button, and boom, they got it. And so even the nature of photography, all these skills are vanishing, which I think is really a shame because either. We lose something very unique there. I mean, and it also poses a huge problem for people who are artists because if everything, I guess you've got to learn to adapt and you've got to become a digital artist in order to make it work. But how do we become original in a world where everything is homogenized and the playing field has been so leveled? It's just really, these are rhetorical questions that I don't have answers. We're just talking about them because they bear noting because we're being swept along in this river that's pulling us all that direction. And I'm not sure, like I said, I don't think this is a master plan. This is just the way we are going because the technology is so inexpensive. It's so prevalent. We can't avoid it. It's unavoidable. Anyway, we have run out of time. We've run out of postulating here. We've run out of our rhetorical questions, and the end of the show is here. But my guest today it's been a fascinating conversation. I always enjoy talking to you. His website his name is Ryan Gable, and he's the author of several books which are on his website. His website is thesecretteachings.info, INFO, thesecretteachings.info. He has a radio show on national radio. You can hear him, and his schedule is posted there. And I encourage you to check out his stuff. And he's a great font of information and knowledge about esoteric topics. How's that sound? Does that sound good?
I think that sounds good, Chris. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And we'll talk soon, Ryan. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Absolutely. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.